Okay, I'm going to be showing a couple of cataloger productivity things, which is a little different than most of what we've been talking about. The first one is a bit on the cataloger's toolkit to help with the conversion of Romanized text into vernacular script. For a long time, at least in our database, we couldn't input any vernacular scripts, even the ones that were supported in the Mark 8 world. And we have a lot of records like this Russian record that only has Romanized text in it. What we wanted was some way to get the vernacular text in. It turns out that for some scripts like Chinese, we can go to OCLC and find the equivalent of this record that someone else has already enhanced and just bring in that record. But for we found that for Russian and a lot of other languages, there wasn't enough in OCLC to make it worth the time to go looking for it. So what I did was add a button to the cataloger's toolkit, which is this little program here, to help us with that work. When the cataloger clicks the button, the toolkit pops open the Voyager record from the cataloging client in a new window. You can't actually edit that record, but there are buttons here that allow you to work with the record indirectly. And we'll just look at that. The first thing you have to do up at the top is make sure you've got the right language selected. Obviously, this is the wrong one. Funny things might happen if you worked on the record when you're set like this. And then once you've got, and that'll stick then. So typically a cataloger is working in Russian, and they won't have to worry about that. And then they start working with the record. It's possible for most scripts to define at least the initial bits that you're going to want to change. So you can define that you're always going to want to say do the 100, the 245, and the 260 and the 246 in a configuration file that we'll look at in a second. And you can click a button that will do all of the predefined bits. In this particular case, I defined rather a lot. But what comes back is the record now with 880 fields paired to each of the fields that you said you wanted to convert. And the Romanized text like this has been converted into the vernacular script. When the cataloger is done working with the record, they just click a button and the record is written back to Voyager. I started out with, I wrote, I think, 4 of the translate tables. I did Russian, classical Greek, I did the Chinese, and maybe I only did 3. Anyway, Hugh Taylor at Cambridge helped me with some of these, and some people at the Library of Congress did some more. For some scripts like Cyrillic, we can actually have a translate table that goes both ways because the romanization is actually perfectly reversible. So you can either start from Romanized text or from vernacular text and go the other way. But for some scripts, that's not possible. Chinese, we can take from the vernacular and go to the Romanized form, but we really can't go the other way because there are so many possible versions or so many possible representation for what turns out to be one syllable. And interestingly, in Hebrew, we can more or less go the other way because we can take, if you will, take the vowels out, but we can't really put them back in. The configuration files for this are pretty straightforward. Basically, it says when you see this letter, replace it with this Unicode character. It can get a little fancier because we can say if you've got, down here, an uppercase I with the left half of a ligature, I'm sorry, here. Uppercase I with the left half of a ligature followed by an uppercase E with the right half of a ligature, then it's the character yeah, and not anything else. Just for the fun of it, I faked a record in Chinese. Basically, I took a record that had 880 fields in it and took all the Romanized stuff out and changed the 880s to what they were supposed to be. And we can say, for this, we could say convert the whole record again because it's really easy to tell which characters are Chinese and which ones aren't because they have different Unicode values. And we can come up with our best guess at what it should be in Romanized form. There were a couple of adventures. For example, for personal names, we simply guessed that the first syllable was the surname and the remaining syllables were forenames, so we just put a comma after the surname. It turned out that we wanted to define some character combinations so that, see, these 2 characters come out, instead of doing each one of those as a separate syllable, which is the normal procedure, we make those say Zhongguo instead, which is the word for China. But we have to define those combinations in advance, and there are an awful lot of them. I only did a couple. And of course, well, the initial translation table was based on this lovely webpage called the 3,000 Most Commonly Used Chinese Characters, which gave the Unicode values for each one. But there are an awful lot more characters than 3,000. So when something isn't in the translate table, it stays as the Chinese character, and you can actually train the program one character at a time about the remaining ones. And it turned out that we could also use the same basic idea to take a record that was in the Wade-Giles romanization, which was used by the Library of Congress and almost no one else until recently, and convert it into a record in the pinyin format, or using the pinyin romanization, because it's a pretty much one-for-one thing as long as you're careful about what you're doing. I didn't really mention this, but in addition to doing the whole record at once thing, the other way to do the romanization or the translation is to highlight a piece of text and say, just do this highlighted bit. And you can work through the record one little bit at a time. You can just do one word if there's only one word to do. And